On a balmy evening in late May 1921, the Greenwood district of Tulsa, Oklahoma, thrived with the energy and vibrancy of a community unlike any other in the United States. Known as Black Wall Street, Greenwood was a beacon of black excellence, prosperity, and resilience, a rare example of an African-American community that had flourished during an era of segregation and rampant racial inequality. But what unfolded over the next 48 hours would etch Greenwood's name into the annals of American history as the site of one of the most devastating acts of racial violence ever perpetrated in the country, the Tulsa Race Massacre. What happened at Greenwood is not only a story of loss and destruction but also one of extraordinary hope and resistance. Greenwood began to take shape in the early 20th century as a place where Black Americans, particularly those escaping the oppressive conditions of the South, could create wealth and build lives for themselves. Located on the north side of Tulsa, Greenwood was established by O.W. Gurley, a wealthy black landowner, in 1906. With a vision of creating an exclusive district for African Americans, Gurley sold land only to black settlers, sparking the rapid growth of a self-sustaining economy. By the 1920s, Greenwood was a bustling community. It had its own banks, schools, movie theaters, hospitals, grocery stores, and luxury hotels. Prominent businesses like the Stratford Hotel and the Williams Dreamland Theater stood as symbols of the district's success. Doctors, lawyers, and entrepreneurs thrived, and the district's economic power earned it the moniker Black Wall Street. Many of Greenwood's residents were descendants of black people who had been enslaved, and their success stood in stark contrast to the impoverished conditions of black people in other parts of the country. Greenwood was a remarkable example of what black communities could achieve despite systemic racism and segregation. Though Greenwood thrived, it existed within a deeply segregated society. Tulsa, in the early 20th century, was no stranger to racial tension, and the success of Black Wall Street became a source of resentment for many white residents. The Ku Klux Klan had a significant presence in Tulsa, and the city itself was divided along racial lines. Economic jealousy and white supremacist attitudes simmered beneath the surface, exacerbating tensions between the black and white populations. At the same time, racial violence was increasing across the United States. The Red Summer of 1919 saw violent clashes between white and black Americans in cities like Chicago and Washington, D.C. These events laid the groundwork for the explosive violence that would soon engulf Greenwood. The incident that sparked the Tulsa Race Massacre occurred on May 30, 1921. A 19-year-old black shoeshiner named Dick Rowland entered an elevator in the Drexel Building in downtown Tulsa where a young white woman named Sarah Page operated the lift. Accounts of what transpired in the elevator vary. Some suggest that Rowland may have tripped and accidentally touched Page, while others speculated that nothing untoward occurred at all. Regardless of the details, Page screamed and Rowland fled the scene. Page did not press charges, but a white clerk who heard the commotion reported the incident to the police, claiming that Rowland had assaulted Page. Rowland was arrested the next day, and rumors of his alleged crime spread quickly through Tulsa. Fueled by sensationalist newspaper reports, including one that declared Rowland had attempted to rape Page, a white mob began to form at the courthouse where Rowland was being held. The atmosphere grew increasingly tense as calls for a lynching spread. On the evening of May 31st, a group of armed black men, many of them World War I veterans, arrived at the courthouse to protect Rowland and prevent the lynching. They were met by a much larger group of white men, some of whom had already gathered weapons. Tensions escalated rapidly. A white man attempted to disarm one of the black veterans, and in the struggle, a gun discharged. The shot sparked an all-out battle, and violence spilled into the streets of downtown Tulsa. As news of the violence spread, white Tulsans began to arm themselves en masse. Thousands of white rioters descended on Greenwood, intent on exacting vengeance and destruction on the black community. Local authorities, rather than de-escalating the situation, deputized many of the white rioters, and even provided them with additional weapons. In the early hours of June 1, 1921, Greenwood came under full-scale attack. White mobs stormed into the district, looting businesses and homes, setting fire to buildings and shooting black residents. The violence was chaotic and indiscriminate. Many black residents fought back, defending their homes and businesses, but they were vastly outnumbered and outgunned. Perhaps most shocking was the use of aircraft by the attackers. According to eyewitness accounts, white rioters dropped incendiary bombs from planes onto the neighborhood, causing fires to spread rapidly. This marked one of the first times in American history that civilians had been attacked from the air. The Tulsa Fire Department, under orders from city officials, refused to respond to the fires engulfing Greenwood, ensuring that the district would be reduced to ashes. By the time the National Guard arrived to restore order, much of Greenwood lay in ruins. The massacre ended by the afternoon of June 1st, but the damage had already been done. In just 18 hours, one of the wealthiest black communities in America had been reduced to rubble. The destruction of Greenwood was catastrophic. An estimated 35 square blocks of the district were burned, including more than 1,200 homes, businesses, churches, and schools. As many as 300 black residents were killed, though the exact death toll remains unknown. Over 6,000 black residents were arrested and detained in internment camps, where they were held for several days without due process. In the immediate aftermath, the survivors of the massacre were left homeless and devastated. Many families lost everything they had worked for. In addition to the physical destruction, the trauma of the event lingered for decades. What followed was a concerted effort to cover up the massacre. The white establishment in Tulsa downplayed the violence, and local officials did little to acknowledge the atrocities. Insurance companies refused to compensate black residents for their losses, citing riot clauses in their policies. The incident was largely omitted from history books and public discussions for much of the 20th century. Despite the overwhelming loss, Greenwood's residents demonstrated remarkable resilience. Many returned to the district and began to rebuild, though it would never regain its former prosperity. By the 1940s, Greenwood had become a shadow of its previous self, but the community's spirit of resistance lived on. For decades, the Tulsa Race Massacre was forgotten by mainstream America, erased from the nation's collective memory. Survivors rarely spoke of it, and it wasn't until the late 20th century that the massacre began to receive the attention it deserved. In the 1990s, the state of Oklahoma established the Tulsa Race Riot Commission, later renamed the Tulsa Race Massacre Commission, to investigate the events and recommend reparations for the descendants of the victims. In recent years, there has been a renewed effort to uncover the full history of what happened in Greenwood. Public apologies have been issued, and memorials have been erected to honor the victims and survivors of the massacre. In 2021, on the 100th anniversary of the massacre, the world's attention turned to Tulsa once again, as President Joe Biden visited Greenwood to acknowledge the tragedy, and the federal government pledged support for further research and restoration efforts. The story of Greenwood, its rise, destruction, and legacy, stands as a powerful reminder of the deep-rooted racial injustices that have shaped the history of the United States. The massacre was not an isolated incident, but part of a broader pattern of racial violence and economic suppression experienced by black communities across the country. However, Greenwood's story is also one of resilience. Despite the extraordinary violence and the efforts to erase their legacy, the people of Greenwood persevered, rebuilding their lives and community. Today, the memory of Black Wall Street serves as both a cautionary tale and an inspiration for those seeking to confront racial inequality and pursue justice. Greenwood's story reminds us that even in the face of destruction, the human spirit has the capacity to endure and rise again.